Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 102. And just a little catch up on what's been going on in the last issue. Tefe, the daughter of Swamp Thing, has lost her body, so Swamp Thing has gone on a journey to the Garden of Eden in order to get some water that, once drunk, can give Tefe the understanding of all language, so that way Swamp Thing and the shaman friend of theirs can teach her how to grow her body back. And while Swamp Thing was doing that, in the last issue, Abby lost Tefe actually because of a gust of wind blew her spirit body away. And we found out that all Tefe wants is to be a real kid because she finds some kids on a playground and then she sees one of them has like a Pinocchio-like doll and possesses it. And then craziness ensues. But she ends up back okay with her mom at the end. And now they're just kind of waiting for Swamp Thing to get back. And we start off with the cover here of issue 102. We got a pretty awesome Simon Bisley image of Swamp Thing, who is reaching out towards us, the reader, and he's all big and bulky. And he is protecting a child that looks half human, half plant. And in case you don't know who Simon Bisley is, he's a pretty famous British artist who is best known for his work on the character Lobo. I believe he did the first couple miniseries of that for DC Comics. And that would have been around the same time as this, actually. We also see on the cover that this is written by Doug Wheeler with art by Mike Hoffman and inks by Peter Gross. And we start off with Swamp Thing and AM. They are now back from Antarctica where the Garden of Eden was, and they have come to the Parliament of Trees where AM is now rooting himself after, I don't know, millennia. I don't know how long he was in the Garden of Eden frozen, but we get to see his frozen body thaw, and then he roots down into the Parliament of Trees. And there's a much rejoicing because it has been so long since he's been in the Parliament of Trees because his voice was missing for so long amongst the elders. In case you don't remember who AM was, he was one of the original 3 members of the Parliament of Trees that Swamp Thing met back in the Rick Veitch run, like during the time travel saga. So now AM is back and he has the water from the fountain in the Garden of Eden. So he gives that to Swamp Thing, and then they bid farewell to each other now that everybody's happy down in the Parliament of Trees. And then Swamp Thing goes into the green, and I guess because the water is, you know, a solid object, it can't just like leave its body and go into the green like he can. So Swamp Thing talks to some of the roots in the trees around him, and he asks them to take the water and to pass it on to the next tree. So basically, he's just going to have each tree going forward, pass it up until they get to Houma in Louisiana, where his wife and daughter are. Then we cut to Houma, Louisiana, and we see there is an emergency happening in the city. There is a hurricane that has hit, and it's flooding a bunch of the town. And because of this emergency, all the roads that lead out of town are, of course, blocked with traffic. And they are at a dead standstill, so people are literally like leaving their cars and just hanging out on the side of the road until it starts moving again. And there are people that are like trying to sell hurricane t-shirts that say, "I survived Hurricane Jenny." I gotta say, those people were super prepared for this hurricane. There's also people selling food, of course. And then weirdly, there's a woman who I guess figures she has a captive audience, and she decides that this is a good time to talk about abortion rights and hand out pamphlets for that. And she's also holding like a little American flag. And as she's yelling out her message and waving the flag, a man in one of the cars gets very angry. He is very anti-abortion. And he yells at the woman, "Give me that flag. Abortion is murder. You've got no right to that flag. That's our symbol of freedom." And then she looks at the guy and she holds up a lighter to the mini flag and says, "Whose freedom? Women's? Bullshit." And she lights it on fire. And that really pisses off this guy. He pulls out a bat that he had in his back seat, and he proceeds to beat her unconscious until she falls down face first into the water that is at the edge of this road. And then as he's looking up and the pamphlets fly away, he sees the gray fungus-covered body of Matango, the god of the gray. So if you don't remember who Matango is, this is the big bad that they've been building to for quite a while, about 20 issues, I think. And he's basically the Swamp Thing of the fungus realm, but he's evil. So we don't like him, and he wants to rot and decay everything in the world. And we see the name of this issue is called All the King's Horses. So Matango's just standing there. He doesn't attack the man or try to help the woman or anything, but her pamphlets about abortion kind of fly in the wind, and he sees them fly, and I guess it gives him an idea, or maybe he already had this idea, but this kind of spurs him to take action. So he picks one of the pamphlets up, and we get some narration from him. It says, "Lovely dark feelings, storm clouds so gray, hatred cursing like honey through man's spiritual veins, blood-stained tasting purple, your scent quite beautiful to the touch," because he can taste the blood from her head wound that got on her pamphlets. And his narration continues, "We/I kill you to spill you, my love, but the child's blood does not sparkle amongst these refugee fleas. We, gray eye, need more eyes, the better to eat her with." And the her he's talking about is Tefe. He's been trying to find out where Swamp Thing and Tefe and his family live, but he's only one person, so he needs to send out spies to keep a lookout. So he raises his hands, and the narration says, "Spread the word, flutter, evangelize now. My leaflets, begather a host." And when he says that, all these leaves that are gray, they're like dead furry leaves, they all fly up from the ground and the trees, and they begin to, I guess, fly through the air and look for Tefe. Then we cut to Swamp Thing's house, where Abby, the shaman, and a woman named Brenda that we've seen before. She's friends with Constantine. She's like a Native American woman that can read signs and futures inside of entrails. So she is there helping them, and I guess waiting for Swamp Thing to get back so Tefe can grow back her body. And then Brenda is there to actually sort through the entrails of Tefe's old body and read her futures, see what's going to happen with this evil that hasn't yet shown itself to them, but they know it's coming. And Brenda is talking to Abby because there's a hurricane going on, and they're in the swamp, which is already flooded. So I can imagine the water is rising, but it hasn't like done anything to their house yet. But Brenda is scared because she's never been in a hurricane or around one. So she's asking Abby, like, does this happen all the time? What is a hurricane like? What was the last one? And Abby's saying the last one was in 1974, which that's crazy for me to hear because I don't know, every year it seems like there's always hurricanes that are around the coast in that area. But maybe back then there wasn't. But either way, they keep talking, and just them talking about it kind of gets them questioning their decision to stay and wait for Swamp Thing instead of leaving in like this hurricane emergency. But just as Abby's thinking that, all of a sudden she hears some like boop, 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 and we get Swamp Thing growing his body back just in time to answer her saying, "I'm glad you chose to stay." And he goes on to explain why it took so long to get back, even though he had the water. It's because he had to transfer it like physically through each tree. So instead of just flying his consciousness through the green anywhere in the world, he had to slowly wait for the trees to transfer the water. And I will say this is a little bit of a story flub, I think, because it doesn't make any sense that AM and Swamp Thing were in Antarctica, and AM's body was even frozen at the beginning of this, and he was thawing in the Parliament of Trees. So unless they walked from Antarctica all the way to South America and to the Parliament of Trees, it just seems like it would take way longer to do that than it would to transfer the water from tree to tree once Swamp Thing left there to come here. But that's just like a little nitpick I found in the story that seemed to be a flaw. So anyway, now that we're back, Swamp Thing and Abby are hugging, of course. They're very happy to see each other. And Swamp Thing looks at her, and he sees that she's got a cut on her head from the last issue when she ran into the tree. And Swamp Thing asks how that happened, but she just says, like, oh, that's for another time. We'll talk about it later. And while they're talking, Brenda comes up and introduces herself. I don't think she's actually met Swamp Thing. We've just seen her working with Constantine in the background in previous issues. So there's Shaman, who actually has a name. I didn't know they ever said his name. They say it very rarely, and it is a very complicated name, but I believe it's pronounced Najagarjuk. Najagarjuk. That's it. That's the one. All right. So I'm not going to say that every time, but just so y'all know, their shaman friend is named Najagarjuk. Well, he gets impatient with all these people talking, and he knows there's more pressing matters. We have to get Tefe her body back so she is not defenseless against the evil that is coming. So he just interrupts them. He already like sits down, builds a fire, does all this stuff, gets everything ready, and he impatiently says, The water, where is it? Let's put your brat back together and get out of here. And Swamp Thing says, it is inside me. Why are you in such a rush? And then the shaman looks at Swamp Thing and points at Tefe and says, look at her. She's losing control of her shape. She's been out of her body too long. Her spirit could dissipate permanently at any moment. And then he holds up one of those gray fuzzy leaves and he says, but worse, I found this outside. It's from my visions. More are still falling from the sky. And when Swamp Thing sees it, he says, it's not part of the green. I found a leaf similar to this the day after Tefe and I returned from hell, but that leaf did not have this fungus growing on it. I recognize now the taint of evil in this leaf and the way it is constructed. This came from Nergal City, from hell, but why is it here? And Abby answers him by saying, maybe it just fell through the same gateway you and Tefe did. And Swamp Thing says, if that is true, then what else might have fallen to the earth? The city of hell we were in was filled with the damned. If they... And then Swamp Thing cuts himself off. He decides it would be a good idea to just burn this leaf. So there's a fire in the center of the room that the shaman and everybody else is sitting around. And this fire is for Tefe's ceremony for getting her new body. And Swamp Thing thinks it would be a good idea to throw the leaf in there and burn it. So he does that, and when he does, of course, the shaman's like, no, what are you doing? And at that moment, we cut to Matango, who can sense the leaving of that leaf. And it's not just Matango now standing in the water. It is a bunch of other fungus people that I guess he's made. Some of them look like women, some of them look like men, but either way, I don't know if they're supposed to be like dead people that are rotting or if they're just fungus in the shape of humans. And Matango's like telepathically talking back and forth with them. So Matango says, my R.I., it's been smitten and burned. The child's been found. I obey. And then the newly grown acolytes say to him, all have seen, gather there now. All have seen, gather there. And we even get a foreboding shot of one of Swamp Thing's old bodies. It doesn't look like it's part of this group yet, but if you remember, Swamp Thing, whenever he leaves, he drops like a husk of his old body, and those just sit there, and they're made of plants, and they're not really rooted or anything, so they're just rotting. And we see a panel of one of these rotting Swamp Thing husks in the mix of this. So they're kind of foreboding that maybe all of those that he just leaves around might be resurrecting and being on the bad side. So then we cut back to Swamp Thing's house, and the shaman is yelling at Swamp Thing. He's saying, why did you toss that leaf in there? This fire has to stay pure. And Swamp Thing answers him by saying, I am not certain. I felt a malevolent presence within it, which I instinctively reacted to. And then even though the shaman got mad at that, he's just like, well, it's too late anyway. We don't have time to start again. So the shaman then starts the ritual. He mixes some meteor ash and some soil from where Tefe's body was initially left by her. And he also has this staff that he says is part of one of the 3 original Parliament of Trees named Sarga. And he says that this will be her backbone and her source of power. And this ritual is crazy. He actually uses the tongue of Tefe's discarded body, and he dips it in the water that Swamp Thing brought back from Eden. And then he tells Brenda and everybody that they need to all eat a piece of the tongue in order to be able to speak to her by linking their minds with Tefe's mind. Then we cut back to Matango, who is enjoying the destruction of the hurricane around him, and his narration says, a captive has been stolen. Robbed from the gray. The balance is tilted. It must be reset. Eye for an eye. The green cannot be permitted an emissary in flesh. And then we cut to the outside of Swamp Thing's house where the ceremony is happening, and we see all the fungus corrupted bodies from before have surrounded the house. Meanwhile, inside, the minds of the shaman and everybody else are finally kind of coming together and linking with the child. But as that happens, Swamp Thing gets a bad feeling and gets like an alarm signal from all the plant life outside. And he tells the shaman, the trees and plants outside are alarmed. I feel their roots torn upwards, their stems snapped. The hurricane will soon reach here. I must reinforce this house. So he thinks this alarm feeling is coming from the hurricane damage, not the followers of Matango that have gathered outside. But of course, Swamp Thing can't actually leave because now he's linked with everybody in this circle. So he actually builds himself a second body, which he says this is the first time he's ever built a second body that's more than a few yards apart before. So this is like a new skill that Swamp Thing's trying out for the first time. And because Swamp Thing has two bodies going at the same time, he's actually seeing double. He's seeing what's going on outside and what's happening inside, and they're overlapping. So he's getting kind of confused because he sees all these gray fungus-covered beings coming towards him, but he's also in the house seeing Tefe and the shaman and, all the orders that the shaman is yelling to them in order to do the ceremony. And because of that, Swamp Thing's second body gets immediately overtaken by the Matango followers. His narration says, "I try to distinguish the overlapping images around me, my senses confused and disoriented. As I lose track of where I am, I sink, collapse, my perceptions adrift. Someone stunning me, clubbing me, blocking my consciousness from gaining hold of this body." And meanwhile, inside, we're seeing the ceremony continue, and Abby actually has to put the spirit of Tefe inside the fire that is now burning with all of the different elements that are required for her to resurrect a body. And as Tefe's spirit is in the flames, the shaman blows out hard with his lungs, and a wind begins to swirl around the flame. And then something crashes into the side of the house and actually puts a hole in the wall. And Abby says to Swamp Thing, "Alec, I thought you were reinforcing the house. Alec?" But he can't respond because he's being distracted by what's going on outside. And what's going on outside is the gray people, the followers of Matango, are fully attacking him. They're trying to corrupt Swamp Thing's second body. And they're actually shoving their fist in Swamp Thing's mouth. And Swamp Thing narrates, "A familiar taste stings my tongue, numbing me further, trying to drag my consciousness into a land of shaded gray. Drowning, I reach for an apparition above me, her face jolting and shaking me, her voice giving me focus." And who he's talking about here is Abby, because she's he's not responding, and she begins shaking his body inside the house. And luckily, Swamp Thing realizes that this new second body has been corrupted and he can't be in it anymore. And he says, "This body is wasted. I abandon it before the rot traps my soul." And then he does something that I didn't think was going to happen, because they kept showing his old discarded husk bodies that are around the swamp, and they have fungal growth, but apparently they are not corrupted because he is able to take them over. And his narration says, "Not having the time or the strength to build a new army, I cast my gaze upon the discarded skins, some leaning, some hobbled, but each still fits. I am tired of playing this lopsided game." So he takes over all these other discarded bodies of his, and they begin to brawl and fight with the gray followers of Matango. Then we got back inside the house, and the ceremony's still going, and it's going okay. Tefe's body is starting to regrow itself, but one thing that's bad is the leaf that Swamp Thing threw in the fire before is smoldering outside of the fire now, and it's actually giving Matango their location. It's speaking to him and telling them where to attack. Specifically that there is now a hole in their wall that leaves them vulnerable and open to not only his followers that are down below, but the leaves that can now blow into the actual house. So as Tefe's body is forming, the shaman tells Abby to talk to her, and she's saying, "That's it. You're so beautiful, Tefe. That's why mommy and daddy love you. We won't let anything come to harm you." And I guess just hearing her mom's voice is helping Tefe form her body and pull herself into the real world. And just as the body is forming, kind of looking more human, and Tefe's actually starting to speak and say mama, and it looks like everything's going good, but the leaves blow in through the window and they begin to hit Tefe's new body that doesn't have any skin or anything, no protection. And when they land on her, wherever they land, wherever they touch, it becomes gray and starts moldering and festering with fungus. And instantly, Abby's joy turns to horror as she sees this body start to grow fungus all over it, and she says, "Oh my God, is that supposed to happen?" And at that moment, Swamp Thing yells out, "No!" And then the bodies that are fighting outside that he's animating stop fighting, and his full consciousness comes once again into his main body, and he is quick enough to be able to pull Tefe's spirit, which hasn't been corrupted yet, from the now corrupted, unfinished body. So he basically stops what was just happening with the ceremony. All of it has failed because these leaves touched Tefe's unfinished body. But because he did this, Now there's no defenses outside, and the attacking Matango followers begin to overrun the house and get into the hole that was created. And just as it looks like Swamp Thing and crew are about to be overrun by these monsters, there's a great noise outside of wind and storm, and it seems like the hurricane is actually hitting this area really hard right now, and it's actually pushing all of the followers out of the area and washing them away and blowing like all the fungus and everything apart, including the house. And so we don't know what's going to happen because that is where it ends. It ends on a panel of the house being hit by extremely strong winds and the rest of the Matango followers being blown away. So that is the end of the issue. If you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comic-books, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember to stay swampy.